1 second. I'm sorry, just 1 second.
Yep.
Today is February 26th. This is our 8th class. We're on our 7th topic, but this is our 8th class in advanced hermeneutics. So, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, just prophets, they seesaw back and forth between different time periods. You know, you have your timeline up there, and a prophet can be in 4 different places on that timeline in one verse. And so I was listening to this pastor online, and he said, yeah, we're going to talk about some near fulfillments and some far fulfillments. And I thought, oh no. But then when you went through the passage, I looked at the passage, it's like, yeah, that's what the prophet's doing, bouncing all over the place. So that's, I think sometimes it's the language. It's not that they don't believe in single meaning hermeneutics. It's just that they call that what we call prophetic foreshortening.
Yeah, okay, I'm not quite sure exactly. I see the point that you're saying. I understand the basic idea, but you know, you will see, you know, I'll just say this. I see this, you know, like having taught through, you know, pretty much everything in the Old Testament and then the New Testament, is that, you know, you will see times when, you know, they will come in and they'll speak about sometimes, okay, you know, Israel, your sin has piled up and God's going to bring this judgment. And, you know, here comes the judgment. But one day, you know, I'm going to bring you back and restore you. And then he'll go right back to saying, so, you know, because of all of this, you need to listen to me and repent right now.
Yeah, and there's good, you're going to have some exile. And then, you know, Alexander the Great's going to come. And, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where, you know, we have to just give attention to, you know, historical context, flowing literary context, what's being said. And as we have the benefit of being able to look at, you know, let's just say the last 2,700 years of history, you know, we have things that have taken place that give us an ability to see things and how they fit together clearer.
Yeah.
Than, you know, some of those people certainly reading, let's say, Isaiah 2,700 years ago.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a kind of a clarity that historical unfolding has given to us. You know, in Daniel, it makes a comment, and it says that, you know, many will run to and fro, and knowledge will increase. And that statement,
Yeah.
Those statements are really referring to increase in prophetic understanding. So the knowledge going back and forth is kind of the idea of searching out the scriptures, and then, you know, the fact that you have things happen that unfold give us a lot easier way of seeing how some of those fit. You know, so, you know, we can look back and say, well, very clearly Christ had to be crucified, and, you know, he was going to rise again. They didn't see those things that clearly. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Deuteronomy 30. Moses is kind of all over the place there.
Okay, well, yeah, well, he says, okay, here's what's going to happen, at least in verses 1 to 10. He says, okay, you know, we're going to be scattered across the whole earth, but the day's going to come when God's going to restore us and bring us back, because he's going to pour his grace out upon us. We're going to turn to him. Deuteronomy 30 verse 6 says that he's going to circumcise Israel's heart, and so there's going to be this restoration. I don't know if that's what you're looking at. But.
Yes, that's what I'm looking at.
Right.
It's, yeah, like you said, from our perspective, it's a lot easier to understand.
Yeah.
I mean, but they could have figured it out. Yeah, something's going to happen.
Yeah, I think at a fundamental level, I really firmly think that that concept of the single meaning of language is a basic principle that never changes, because that's how we understand anything, is by looking at language and reading it. You know, what becomes kind of the mind-blowing theology on how it all fits together is when you look at the way that the Spirit of God was at work in those Old Testament prophets, and, you know, giving them understanding of some of the messianic elements of what was happening, like in typology, where, you know, we see that, wow, there was a Passover lamb for Moses, and yet Christ is really the Passover. And so as you see these Christological kinds of things coming out in the prophets, you begin to say, wow, there's something that, God pulls together the promises of this one individual, and how, these things get amplified in the New Testament is mind-boggling, So then what we have to do is we have to say, okay, what's going on here, and how do these things fit together? And I think it's the work of the Spirit of Christ in those prophets of the Old Testament. And some of those things just simply are not there on the surface level that the New Testament brings out. My favorite example is the Isaiah 7 one. I simply don't think that you can really make the argument, oh yeah, this clearly is a prophecy about the Messiah. But then, as you see Matthew connecting it in the New Testament, you go, there's something here, we have to account for it.
Yeah. I got one more question.
Yeah.
This is, okay, so we have the blessing and cursing in Deuteronomy 27 and 28. He says, okay, if you obey, you can have these blessings. If you disobey, you're going to have all these cursings. And then that, I don't know, here I wrote that the prophets really, all these, the curses are actually an amazing prophecy of what happens to Israel. Moses has prophesied what's going to happen to Israel, and the prophets, the later prophets, pick up on that, and they say, this is happening because, you're disobedient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was because of the curse that was prophetic. Okay, so the blessings, so Israel doesn't believe or obey. The blessings are going to be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom?
Well, the blessings are those that God swore to them if they stayed faithful to the Mosaic covenant.
Yeah.
So they had 800 years basically,
Yeah.
to live in the land, and to small amounts to small degrees,
Yeah.
Israel experienced the blessings. I mean, God gave them the land. So when you look at, like in Joshua, Joshua
Yeah.
says that, none of God's promises failed. God gave them victory over the Canaanites and gave them the land. Now, within Joshua, and even in Joshua and also in Judges, it says, but they didn't obey God by driving out the Canaanites.
Yeah.
So, what happened is that, what God told them to do is to purge the land of all the Canaanites. They didn't do it. And just like God warned them, the Canaanites ended up becoming, the downfall,
Yeah.
So, they began to become idolaters, and, eventually that caught up with them. And so those blessings that are spoken of there. Now, when you look at like in Deuteronomy 30, right there, what Moses says is, after you've been scattered all across the face of the planet, God one day is going to bring us, the people of Israel, back and restore us, and he's going to bless us more than we ever had in the fathers. So he promises that there's going to be, a blessing in the kingdom that supersedes anything that ever happened.
Okay, but I just don't know how to connect it all up. There's blessings in chapter 28. Are they connected with the blessings in the millennial kingdom? You can't
No,
do
those
that.
are, no, it's all speaking about
Okay.
just going into the land and having the favor of, a prosperous land with peace and everything else.
Okay.
All right, so we're talking here about creationism, and you've done some studies and readings. What do you have? Mike is
I have
our-
an creation.
yeah.
So old Earth creationists would include both evolutionists and progressive creationists. And neither one of them explain how God creates. The progressive creationists, I assume, that they think that God spoke different creatures into existence at different times, which is basically evolution. But so they would say that God spoke these things, these creatures into existence, as Genesis 1 says.
Well, yeah.
They're not real clear on how God creates over millions of years.
No, they can't be because they're not following the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, I don't know, like,
And the
that's a good question. So did you have something like, fish, for millions and millions of years, but you didn't have, land animals for, millions of years? Is that kind of like what you're saying?
Yeah, but there has to be some kind of small change, which I call evolution.
Yeah,
You know-
well, yeah. So you've done lots and lots of studies and writing on this whole topic,
Well, yeah, but I still don't understand how they believe God created things, but their explanation of
Yeah.
how God did it.
I wouldn't worry much.
The evolutionists, the Christian evolutionists, that they can't explain how God evolved everything. Their science is exactly the same as atheistic science.
Well, I think you'd kind of have the same thing in like progressive creationism, would you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. You're never going to figure out, what Mormon theology really is, because it's a convoluted lie, and it's just this big maze. The same thing is true with anything that revolves around evolution. It's just a convoluted lie. I mean, that's, yeah, I think. So I would lump all that stuff, and it's like, okay, we can identify, let's say, the gap theory, or day-age theory, or progressive creationism, or whatever. None of it is what God really says. He says it pretty clearly in the Bible. He made everything in 6 literal solar days, and then he ceased creating on the 7th day. And if the chronologies of the Bible mean anything, it was about like 6,100 years ago. Yeah. And, so then he made different kinds of creatures, and they all are distinct kinds. So you've got everything that stays within its kind, and they reproduce. And there's variation within those kinds. So, you have big dogs, little dogs, black dogs, white dogs. Do you know that?
I knew that.
That's Go Dogs Go,
Oh, yeah.
the book, yeah.
Dog issues.
Yeah. All at a dog party.
Well, you gotta tell us what the hermeneutics of the old earth position is, because I have no idea. They use the Bible somehow.
All right, well, so let's go to the Bible. All right, so this is my notes from the creation science class. I'm not going to go through all this because I've got 246 slides. Let's see here. Here's the first thing to recognize is that scientists are not some objective, bias-free kinds of people, He says here, okay, we have lab coats now, but we need a good excuse to wear them. But anyhow, people think that the evolution, people think that the world of science is somehow bias-free. It is not bias-free. Nobody is bias-free. I'm not bias-free. I believe in God, and I think that anybody who rejects him is a stupid liar. No.
It's a fool.
Yeah. So, but we have our biases, and, whether or not we have a good bias is a question, But I believe that there is a God. His word is true. So anyhow, just this is the basic point, that they think that, science is somehow objective and bias-free. Now, I suppose you may have some people, even unsaved people, working in the realm of science that, by God's providential common grace, they are willing to try to look at evidence.
Right, they just want to be objective.
Yeah, Now, an example of this, speaking about this guy who wrote the book Genetic Entropy, John Sanford, who was a geneticist from Cornell, 23 years as a geneticist at an Ivy League university, And then he said, you know what, everything that we teach in biology about evolution is absolutely the opposite of what we see in real genetics. And he said, I can't keep teaching this. He wasn't even a Christian. A short time later, he did get saved. But the basic, as he words it, the basic axiom of evolution is that random mutations produce increasing knowledge and complexity that bring a functional advantage to creatures. So the less advantaged creatures die out, and the ones that have the evolutionary advantages through mutations become the dominant species. And that's what evolution, that's Darwinian evolution. But he said in genetics, here's what we see: mutations never ever produce increasing complexity in the DNA. Never do they produce increasing knowledge. It's always deleterious. There's always loss of information when mutations take place. Always. But evolution is built on the idea that mutations are creating increasing complexity in the DNA, and eventually that produces increasing advantage for a particular creature. So, that's a huge thing right there. All right. All right. So let me fast forward here. So in evolutionary thinking, they basically say that the creation is 14 billion years old. Well, we can't call it the creation, can we? The cosmos is 14 billion years old, and that about 4.5 billion years ago is when the Earth kind of came together out of a bunch of stardust and cosmic dust, and created the Earth and created the other planets. And then over 4 billion years, there started to evolve different kinds of chemicals that somehow ended up producing something organic. And then this organic goo, the primordial ooze, primordial
Soup.
soup. The primordial soup eventually, made something organic, and then that organic soup evolution started going to work, and then eventually it got more complex, and you have the whole evolutionary tree. I tell people when they're going to Vegas, never hit 17. One of my little jokes, right? Because, here's what it's, when you're playing blackjack, don't ever hit 17. You're going against the odds. So if you spent, 100 years playing blackjack in Las Vegas, and you always hit 17, I can almost guarantee you, you're going to lose always in the long run, because you're going against the odds. Now, if you're smart playing blackjack, you might be able to walk away with some money. Maybe. But anyhow, if you go against the odds, it's like nothing's going to happen. And hitting a 17 to try to get 21 is really just kind of like barely going over the odds. But when you talk about, creating something like an enzyme or a protein, like 1 in 10 to the 263rd power, is what they say the odds are to make a protein. So you're saying that's going to happen, and it's going to keep happening? It's like so far away from reality, that it's like, come on, this is so stupid.
Soup theory.
There's so many things that work against the origin of life. It's just
Yeah.
amazing that they believe that. Even water, they say it has to happen in water, in the oceans, but water causes things to disassemble. Water is the greatest solvent on Earth.
Yeah. I mean, I heard somebody talking the other day, I forget who it was, you might have been there, but, the idea that, ask people, what are your assumptions when you believe in evolution? What are you basing your assumptions on, And so, well, first of all, What is, what do evolutionists believe where it all came from? I don't know,
Well, there's not like super agreement on that, I guess, but you could say most people up to nowadays, I guess, would say like a singularity. They have to boil it down to something.
So, a Big Bang, and
Right, yeah.
now, some people, like Stephen Hawking said, I hate the idea of thinking that there was ever a point of singularity because this sounds too much like biblical creation, and I don't want anything to do with that
Something has
idea.
to act on the singularity.
Yeah, but that was kind of like in his own words,
Right.
But here's at least in the Big Bang, my understanding from listening to people, including Jason Lyle and some of the things he was saying, is that the idea of a Big Bang is really bad science, and people who know what they're talking about don't believe it. Now everybody else does because that's what the textbooks say. But here's the basic idea, of a Big Bang. If you don't believe in a creator, is that okay? There was this point in time where everything just kind of exploded out of nothing, and it became the whole cosmos. All right, now what is, Mike, the rule of creation and conservation in physics?
Matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed.
So, according to the first law of thermodynamics, nothing can come into existence, and nothing can go out of existence. So where did it come from then? Yes. So we have an answer for that. A supernatural God made all of this matter and energy. But you do have a super big starting problem just to say where did it come from. Now if they try to say, well, we think that maybe it was just this little dot in this little pinprick in the universe, and then this pinprick exploded and became the Big Bang. Okay, so you still have to say where'd that come from. Now, if they say that it is eternal, what is the second law of thermodynamics?
Entropy. Entropy, everything is tending towards disorder.
Everything is in a state of disorder.
Without anything being added to it, everything is tending towards disorder.
Yeah, and since we don't have anything outside of the cosmos, yeah, it is in a closed system, I think. So here's what the law of entropy says, and if you don't believe it, just bring your little grandkids over and leave them in a toy room and then see what it looks like after they're done. And my wife on Monday was saying, these kids downstairs, which is filled with toys, So, it becomes this, never
Chaos.
goes the other direction. Okay, but if a person says, well, I just think that everything existed here as this little pinprick, and then at some point, 14 billion years ago, it exploded, and it became the cosmos, okay? According to the law of entropy, which is a law of physics, it says that everything in the universe is going through a state of decay. So what would have happened by definition, if these were eternal, is that all of that energy would have gone through a complete state of entropy so that there would be a massive dispersion of heat throughout the universe, and you'd have a state of equilibrium where there'd be a universal heat dispersion all through the universe, if that were eternal. It already would have gone through a complete state of entropy, and you just have this big heat dispersion throughout the universe. So you can't explain where everything come from. You can't say, well, it just came into existence, because the first law of physics says, no, law of creation. Nothing is being created, nothing's being lost. Second law of physics says, no, can't be eternal, because by definition, it would have become a complete heat dispersion.
Well, there was another issue when you had just had the singularity there before it exploded. You had used the term, it's sitting here and it's in the universe. So are we just talking about the things that are existent within the universe that came from the singularity, or the universe itself came from the singularity? Because if the singularity itself wasn't within a space, and it was itself the space,
Well, we use time, space, force, matter, and energy to describe, everything that does exist. And so, as a creationist, and I think, even an unsaved physicist, we would say that space is part of everything, if I understand your question.
Yeah, I guess so. If you just have the singularity there, where is the singularity, or is the singularity everything? Does that make sense? It doesn't exist anywhere.
Well, so what you have is you have a really, really bad problem if you're an evolutionist. If you're a naturalist evolutionist, you can't even explain where everything come from. But so what they say is that, well, somehow, I mean, again, the Big Bang theory is a bad theory, even by people who are not Christians. They say this is bad. But so everything kind of came out of this thing, and now you have things like, planets, including Earth, and then, somehow, all of this, dust and space matter accumulated and became a planet, and, you have a planet that, goes round and round, and, you have a moon that goes around the planet, and all of this, goes around the sun, and then somehow on this planet you have, water and oxygen, and but that's water and oxygen still are not life. But then somehow you ended up with, chemicals that became organic. That word is called abiogenesis. Abiogenesis is the concept that all life and all organic matter arose from non-life, an idea that is a scientific impossibility, says Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins in a chapter called The Mystery of Life's Beginning. Never, ever does life come out of non-life. It's impossible, it doesn't happen. Robert Gray, he said one time he was at a college campus sharing the gospel with some guy, and the guy was being antagonistic, and so Robert saw a couple of rocks sitting right next to him, and he took these two rocks and just started like smacking them into one another. He goes, "How long would I have to do this before I would get something organic and living out of this?" And the guy said, "It's impossible, it never happened." And Robert said, "That's what I'm trying to tell you." The guy said, "Wait, I got to think about this." Because that's what you believe. Now, first of all, when if there were a Big Bang, everything would be, it's like a giant, nuclear explosion. Nothing ends up orderly. How is it, even that you have something where planets came together and formed, or stars came together and formed? That goes against entropy as well. And the fact that, they carry, an axis and a, rotation around the Earth and everything, nothing matches up with real science.
Because it's order coming out of disorder.
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
No.
Right, you either believe like Robert Gray was saying, like rocks are just smacking together and things are coming from that, or you believe against impossible odds that everything just so happened to go to the perfect spot and do everything perfectly.
Yeah, so what I'd say to that person is, please come to my casino. I'd like you to come and gamble at my casino. So, when we talk about like the ideas that try to fit evolution into, into the picture, now of course the non-Christian, evolutionist doesn't care about the Bible at all. But for people who try to claim that they believe the Bible and they want evolution to fit into it, then you've got, one idea is the gap theory. The gap theory says, well, Genesis 1:1 happened, that God originally made everything. And then after Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, there was the fall of Satan, and the whole creation fell into chaos and judgment. And then God began shaping the creation as we see it in verse 2. So they will place billions of years in between verse 1 and verse 2, and that's called the gap theory. What can we say about it? It's a lie. It's not true. It's not biblical. And it's bad theology. It's not what it says. But that's the gap theory. And if you go back, to like, let's just say 1800, 1900, turn of the century, because evolution was starting to gain steam in the late 1800s, but, you can get some of these guys that were big name, let's say Princeton theologians, that, believe the gap theory.
Spurgeon did.
Huh?
Spurgeon?
Warped
Did Spurgeon? Probably. Did he?
He did.
Yes, in
I
80
think,
Okay, yeah.
Would you call them the gap theory? Would you call that old earth creationism?
It would be, I think that would kind of go together.
Okay.
Yeah. Because they're trying to find some way of saying, the science world says that we have to believe in billions of years, so if we want to be academically respectable, you got to believe in billions of years. So the gap theory is one idea, or the day-age theory, where they say that every time you see God say, then there was evening and morning, first day, that's like, hundreds of millions of years, and then the next one is more hundreds of millions of years. But that doesn't work when you look at Genesis and what it says. But that's the idea of day-age theory.
Yeah, did a lot of notable scientists, a lot of notable theologians believe that one? Day-age theory?
Nobody's notable in my view.
No, the Princeton guys.
probably many
that's what I
today.
mean.
Huh?
There's probably many older theologians today.
Yeah, about 20, I don't know what year was it, probably around 2000 or something like that. Eugene Merrill is like one of the, greatest theologians, Old Testament theologians of, this generation. And so he did a course at Masters, one January. And I remember him saying, he says, it breaks my heart. I'm the only guy in the Old Testament department at Dallas that still believes in a literal creation account.
Oh my goodness.
At Dallas.
Yeah.
Boy.
And that was like, 25 years ago,
I think there are certain, not all of them, and it's definitely not typecast of the Catholic Church, but you hear certain, you'll hear Catholic people talk that way about day-age creation. A lot of them are not creationists.
Yeah, so you got
So
day
Roman
age
Catholics
or
believe in
what's
day-age
it,
creation.
I've heard a lot of people talk, a lot of Roman Catholics talk that way, yeah.
Oh, okay.
and going along with kind of the day age is a label called progressive creationism. And I don't even try to say, oh, well, what's exactly the difference here, because I think it's so wrong that I'm not going to waste my time trying to, but the progressive creationism is the idea that, God was progressively creating over all of these different ages. Now, let's see here. So the big issue here is not, gee, do we have to really believe in young Earth versus old Earth? But old Earth is what they try to use, billions of years to try to make their argument, because we don't see evolution happening, right? It doesn't happen. So what do you do if you don't see it happening? You say, well, maybe if we just gave it enough time, it'll happen. So we got to plug some billions of years, and that's why they have that.
The time actually works against evolution because of entropy.
Yeah.
The more time you give it, the more things fall apart.
So, so when we talk about a young Earth, we're talking about, I think that, it takes us back to 6,100 years ago. About 4114 BC is, what seems to me adds up. Some people would say, 4,000, 4,004, but anyhow, it's not like we're trying to argue for a precise date, but the biblical chronologies, in my understanding and calculations, which doesn't mean it's right, but comes out to about 4114. How do we get that? It comes primarily from the genealogies of the Bible, Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 11. Some people say, well, but the genealogies have gaps in them. Really? Okay, show me. No, they don't. Now, we can identify some places, and genealogies don't always list every single individual in a genealogy. Matthew created a genealogy, not created, but put together a genealogy that has 3 groupings of 14 generations. So there was, some shaping of the genealogies in Matthew based upon customs of how they put together genealogies. But, okay, as we'll see when we look at it, you don't have gaps. But that's the argument, is that, well, there are gaps in the genealogy, so we're going to find someplace where we can put hundreds of millions of years or billions of years in there. When we go outside the Bible to argue for a young earth, we could look at fossils. Now, if you pick up a fossil and you look at it, this fossil doesn't, have a footnote on the bottom that says, oh, this fossil is, 65 million years old. How old? When did the dinosaurs die out? 65 million years ago. Yeah. Nothing tells us that. However, there are dating methods out there that some radioisotope dating methods are absolutely irrelevant in terms of establishing a date. But others, like C14 dating, is really a big ally to the creationist. There are still unknowns about how things worked in the past, but creation, carbon-14 dating is really a big ally to the creationist. We have the implications of genome entropy, the fact that we're falling apart. Every generation of human beings, of babies, there's about 1,000 additional mutations in the next generation, and it's all cumulative. It builds up. So we're becoming X-Men. And, it creates a building genetic problem for the human race and animals. A very important part of looking at dates is historical and archaeological information. Written history is huge. Okay, so, thoughts or questions here? Those are some kind of sources of data. Let's look at, when we talk about Genesis, and we have three major supports for a literal Genesis account. First of all, we look at the literary genre of the book of Genesis. Is Genesis a form of Hebrew poetry?
No.
Genesis 1 to 11.
Not poetry.
Elements of poetic.
Where?
Chapter 1 after Eve is
I
formed.
mean, he made a statement. He says, wow, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Yeah, I don't know if anybody, maybe somebody does that would treat that in a poetic way, but he just made a declaration.
Fair.
Yeah, why does, a lot of my Bible is indented.
Like where?
Like when he speaks to the snake in chapter 3. when
So,
God speaks to the serpent.
Yeah, so I guess the convention right there would be because it's some kind of, they're recognizing that there's dialogue happening.
Okay, so that's not a signal from my translators that that's poetry.
Yeah, I mean, that's identifying speakers. So God speaks in verse 14, God speaks in verse 15. Well,
Actually, there's a lot of others.
it's all
that
God
I'm thinking
speaking.
It's not indented.
Yeah. But here's the issue about is that we recognize that there is such a thing as a Hebrew poetry, and this is kind of a distinct genre now. Genre is just kind of like a patterns of things. If you go to a Blockbuster movie store, they have one aisle that says action adventure. You know what's going to happen in those movies. They're going to have a six-shot pistol, and the guys that are shooting, 1,000 machine guns at them are never going to hit him. And this guy is going to, fire 6 shots and kill everybody. That's how it works in action movies. If it's a horror movie, this stupid little girl is not going to turn around and see the murderer that's standing behind her. Why doesn't she turn around? Because it's a horror movie. So you notice in Hebrew poetry, there's patterns of the way that things work. And a couple of the major patterns of Hebrew poetry is that it has a lot of short kinds of stanzas. The sentences in Hebrew poetry, and I can tell you this from having, translated, a lot of the Psalms and Proverbs and whatever. But the sentences are much, much shorter compared to narrative sections. And Hebrew poetry also has a tremendous amount of parallel structure. So, a good example of this would be in 2 Samuel chapter 23, where you see David. These are David's last words. So here's David's last psalm. David, the son of Jesse, declares. Look how short that sentence is right there. David, the son of Jesse, declares. And then the next statement, the man who was raised on high declares. Now, who is the second person talking about?
Jesus.
Huh?
Jesus.
No, David.
Who's the third one? The anointed of the God of Jacob. Who's that one? Huh?
David.
David. Who's the sweet psalmist of Israel?
David.
David. All four of them. That's called Hebrew parallel structure. And so this is very common in poetry, is that you'll see different kinds of parallel structures. Sometimes they're sequential, sometimes they're antithetic, but this is a common kind of characteristic. So short statements in parallel kinds of structures. All right. When you look at Genesis, here's the key point, and this is something that is recognized by Hebrew scholars, is that this is a historical narrative. It's not poetry. So if somebody says, well, Genesis is just a big poetic account, so we shouldn't believe it. No, it's not poetry. It's narrative. The sentence and verbal structure of Genesis 1 to 11 conforms to historical narrative. So that's an important point. It's a very important point. Hebrew poetry consists of short sentence structure, numerous parallels. On the other hand, narrative consists of longer sentence and a higher frequency of what we call preterite verbal structures. So you've got a lot of statements, and then this is what happened, and this happened, and then this happened. So then you have these what we call preterite verbs, vav consecutives, that tell a flowing story. Genesis is not poetry. James Johnson, scholar, says the bottom line is that Genesis is not poetry, for Hebrew poetry is defined by parallelism and meaning, with parallel lines coming in pairs or triplets or more.
On that point of the vav consecutives, I remember when Dr. Lyle was here, and he said, if Genesis is a poem, it's the worst poem ever. Because of he's like, imagine you wrote a poem and it was just, and then this happened, and then this, and then this, and this.
And then she kissed me, and then I asked her to marry me. And then,
honeymoon.
okay, here's the second reason, is the words themselves. Okay, how many times in the Old Testament does the term day have a non-literal meaning when it is qualified by a numerical adjective? Now, the word for day in Hebrew is the word yom, Y-O-M. Can the word day in Hebrew in the Old Testament ever mean something other than a 24-hour solar day? The answer is yes. Now what about in English? Can the word day ever mean something other than a literal 24-hour solar day?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So language, that's how language works. So, we understand, from context how this works. So, back in the day, when we were kids, the day means a time period, right? It's clear. But if I said, tomorrow is the day you need to turn in your homework, that's pretty clear. That's a day. Furthermore, when we look at a day when it's qualified, like first day, second day, never anywhere does day not mean anything other than a literal 24-hour day. So when we come to Genesis and we look at the creation account, we see here, in the beginning God created, the earth was formless and void, darkness over the surface of the deep. The Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. God said, let there be light. There was light. He saw the light was good, separated light from darkness. God called the light day. Darkness he called night. And there was evening and morning, first day. So whenever you see first day, now this is one day because technically that's a cardinal number in verse 5. After that, they are in grammatical form ordinal numbers, second, third. But whenever you see day qualified by a numerical adjective, it always means a literal day. So we have a real problem if we try to say, well, that just means, a long time period, like, 500 million years. And furthermore, it also says there was evening and morning. So what's happening is that you've got the earth spinning on an axis from the very moment that God created the earth. And remember, when God created the earth was a giant ball of water, and there was no land masses outside of the water. So God had this giant mass that was spinning, and he had a light source that he created that was bringing light to the earth. So as the earth is spinning, guess what? Evening, morning, first day. So
I was just saying, I just told Michael that. Michael keeps asking me, does the sun move? Does the sun move?
does the sun move?
Yeah.
Well, I think it does, right?
Oh, please.
Everything
don't.
is kind of like moving
I
in the
keep
whole.
telling you, no, please
As
don't
far
tell
as,
me. Yes.
as far as the whole galaxy, yes, it does.
Relative to us, it doesn't.
I don't know about relative to us.
So, so what you have is, we're spinning right here. We've got a moon that is going in a, what do you call it? Orbit around us. And then we're orbiting around the sun,
Yeah.
and all of that is in motion as well. In terms of our solar system, it's all in motion.
I wouldn't say it's a lot of motion. I mean, stars are fixed for the most part.
Stars are fixed?
Yes, the
Stars are
sun
fixed,
moves.
yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Stars don't move.
I think in
Uh,
The
relation
sun
to,
doesn't move.
I think they always stay relatively the same to us from our vantage point.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. I think it's true, again, I would just say, I think that somehow everything in relation to itself is maybe still there,
It
but,
says the sun orbits the center of our galaxy at about 514 miles per hour, taking roughly 225 million years to complete one orbit.
Around the, whatever's in the middle.
Around the galaxy.
yeah. So yeah, there's something that's fixed, Betsy, in terms of the relationship that we have to ourselves. But here's the point that I'm getting to on this is that we have the genre of Genesis, says this is something to be taken literally. The words themselves say this is to be taken literally. And then if you think about the context of what's going on, the immediate literary context of Genesis 1 onward certainly screams for a literal 6-day creation. There's nothing in this, I don't think, in this context that would suggest to us that, well, this really means ages or something like that. The wider context would include a book that Moses wrote a month later, because if we go to Exodus chapter 20 in verse 8, which is written a month after Genesis by the same author, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, neither you nor son nor daughter, male or female servant, your cattle, sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. So that's within the same author a month later,
Yeah, so would the old earth hermeneutic be saying, we're still talking day age here? What would they be saying about that verse?
I don't know. I'm not trying to be
Yeah.
write you off. I don't know,
Maybe they're thinking something.
off the top of my head, I don't know how what some of those guys would say.
They would say we're still.
I've read them, but I don't remember. What's that?
They would say we're still in the seventh day now, that God is still creating now, because this is the seventh day, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know about the other.
Now, here's let's Betsy take any of those other views and look at it from a theological perspective, because at a literary perspective, in terms of exegesis, it's like, sorry, that just doesn't stand up.
Yeah.
But theologically, here's a really big problem, is that Romans 5:12 says that through one man, Adam, sin entered the creation and death came in through Adam's sin. And so in all of those other kinds of old earth views, whatever you call it, gap theory, day age, progressive creation, they have death taking place for hundreds of millions or billions of years until finally, a human being came out of the whole process. And so that's like completely, going against what it says about the entrance of sin and death.
Okay, because sin happened after the creation.
Could sin happen after?
Does sin happen after the creation? And they're saying creation was really long and had a lot of.
Yeah, but they still have the idea that they want evolution to be in there. So evolution is based upon the idea of death, a process of death, where the more advanced creatures through evolution, through mutation, have the advantage and they survive and they thrive. So, but evolution is based upon death.
Life comes from death, yeah.
Yeah, you actually talked about this in your paper on page 20.
Yeah, so that's a big theological problem, and I think it's a really, really big theological problem.
Yeah, I think no matter how much you want to believe that, you have to, if you believe theologically that physical death comes from sin, then you have to take a creationist perspective.
Yeah, so, I mean, if we're going to believe the Bible at all, if we're going to believe those things, then why are we wasting our time even trying to read the Bible, It's like we're kind of denying, So, the Old Testament shows a literal view, so I'm not going to turn to these different passages, but in the Old Testament we see passages of the Bible that go back and talk about a literal creation account. So the Old Testament affirms a literal Genesis. Jesus taught a literal creation account, like in Mark chapter 10, he says, well, in the beginning, here's how God did it. He made a male and a female. That's one example. Paul held a literal view of the creation account, and I've got about like a dozen verses listed right there. Hebrews, different authors, different place of the Bible, held to a literal view of creation. James held to a literal view of the creation account. Peter held a literal view. John held a literal view, and Jude held a literal view. So everybody in the Bible affirms this. But then, 1900 years after the Bible, people come along and say, well, yeah, but it doesn't mean that. God created everything, even the angels. You know that.
I recognize them.
Yeah, Charlie's angels. How about you, Ann?
What? You
The
recognize
angels.
them? Yes.
Yeah, Betsy would remember that one.
Yeah, I used to watch that.
Charlie's Angels. Okay, so there's the gap there. I'm not going to go there. Genealogies, as I mentioned, it takes us back, and I probably have already given you guys, blah blah blah, nth times that kind of chronologies of the Bible. Do you have it? Have you ever gotten it? The answer, Ann said no.
No, I didn't hear your question.
Sorry.
I missed it.
I have a document that's just kind of like the flow of biblical history.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. I spent a lot of time on it over many years, just saying, does it all add up? And I think it really does add up. If somebody comes along and says, nope, here's your problem, it doesn't work, then I'll say, okay, I need to change it. But I think it really does add up.
Dan was telling me that Shem was still alive when Abraham was born.
I'm sorry, what was
Was
that?
Shem alive when Abraham was born? Dan was asking me that.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I'm not. I don't have an answer immediately off the top of my head. So let's do this.
So you got that Adam's chronological chart. You remember that thing that is in the youth room? It's that big.
Yeah.
I don't know how accurate that is, but I have it on my phone.
So Adam lived 930 years. So what's 4114 minus 930? 4114 minus 31. That's 3184. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
3184. And Shem was born in 2556. So I think Adam died about 600 years before Shem.
But didn't you said
Oh,
Shem
you
to,
said Abraham.
Shem to Abraham, all right.
Shem
Oh.
Abraham.
So Shem
Yes.
lived
Well,
600 years, which would take you to
they had
1956.
Yeah.
They had a 200-year overlap.
And Abraham was born in probably about 2166. So yeah, so he was about 200 years old when when Abraham was born, or what do I want to say here? Yeah, so I think he was probably. All right. All right. So questions. I mean. Any thoughts or observations? And this deal right here, let's just go ahead and look at it. So what I've got on this thing is that I've got, according to the Bible and the flow of the genealogies. Now, you know, when we put something like this together, you know, you kind of have to do part of it by working backwards. We have pretty strong evidence that, let's just say if we went all the way back to the Exodus, that the Exodus was in 1446 BC. And pretty strong evidence that Israel went into Egypt 430 years before that in 1876 BC. So when we work backwards, you know, as we look at some of these things that go way back to like Adam, you know, we could, you know, we kind of work backwards and saying, okay, here's things that we do know. So if you work backwards from, let's say that, you know, what it does is it kind of tells us the time frame when different people were born, like the sons of Jacob, and when Jacob himself was born, and, you know, before him, Isaac and Abraham. A lot of scholars agree that Abraham was born about 2166 BC. And then as you just keep working backwards with the biblical genealogies, you know, that's what brings you back to this 4114. So I don't know. As a biblicist, that's what how I start. Now somebody might say, yeah, but you know, Egypt has historical things that go back to a certain time period. I'm going to take biblical timelines over secular timelines. Matter of fact, if you think about Egypt and their datings that they have for like their early dynasties, that really is known to have some real big problems and questions, even by unsaved, you know, Egyptologists, you know. So just because you hear something like, well, you know, Egypt had a time frame going back or something.
So did the Jews make the pyramids?
The Jews? No, probably not. No, so, I mean, as best as what I come up with is that you have the flood in 2458 BC. And I wouldn't die on that hill, you know, but that's what I come up with. And what others, you know, 2458 BC. So after Noah's flood is where you have the spreading of the descendants of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And Ham is the one that migrated in to Egypt, and one of Ham's sons was named Mizraim, and the name Mizraim in Hebrew literally is Egypt. So Egypt is a grandson of Noah. So the people group that we call the Egyptians, you know, would have started somewhere around 2400 BC.
Jeez.
So when you see something that says, well, the pyramids were built in like 2900 BC, I don't know. I wouldn't go with that, you know. And there's questions in those early dynasties of Egypt where there's probably things in the Egyptian chronologies where they're not sequential dynasties, one after the other, but they're parallel dynasties throughout different parts of Egypt. And those things became a really united kind of power structure in the days of Joseph, when the Pharaoh that Joseph worked for basically consolidated all of the wealth of Egypt, because everybody had to come to Pharaoh to buy food, because Joseph had said, hey, I got a plan for you. Make people give you $5 million. So Joseph did.
For a golden stack of
Yeah.
wheat.
You give them their food for $5 million, and they had no choice. And so they came and they gave $5 million to get food from Pharaoh, and Pharaoh became, this massive concentration. But anyhow, so you don't necessarily have all these sequential dynasties. If you go back into the earliest dynasties, they're not sequential, but they're parallel at different places, and you can't add them up and say, well, here's the time frame. That's, no, whatever. Yeah,
Are the Palestinians the Canaanites?
that's a good question.
They act like the Canaanites, don't they?
Yeah. Well, they act like the Philistines. Palestinians, Philistine,
I know. But
same name.
Yeah, so
And-
they're like the bad people.
Well,
I know that's,
Did
is
they
that
Canaanites?
racist? Is that bad to say?
The Canaanites.
I'm meaning it in the not political way.
I was talking to
but-
somebody about this the other day, and I can't remember who it was, just a couple days ago, because the question came up. But when I was in Samaria, which is, central Israel, you have the Samaritans, right? Okay, now, in my day, in our day and age, they're called the Samaritans that live there. And there is a place in Samaria, Mount Gerizim, where they do sacrifices, lamb sacrifices at Passover. Well, they were doing those things 2,000 years ago when Jesus was there. That's when the woman at the well says, well, our fathers worship up here on this mountain. So you have ethnic, groups of people there that have been living there for at least 2,000 years, and their descendants have been there throughout these time periods. And that includes from the time of Jesus. You had Rome controlling that part of the world. Now, Rome controlled, pretty much that entire block of the world until 632 BC, AD. Who came along in 632? Islam. So you have this religion that invaded, the entire ancient world, the ancient Near East, and Islam came to dominate, but you still had people groups that remained there. So all of a sudden, you've got a pagan, false religion called Islam that now begins taking over, but you still have the same people groups. So if you go up into Samaria, those people are probably significantly connected with the Samaritans that lived there 2,000 years ago, and even back to 2,700 years ago when Samaritans began existing. If you go into the coastline down there, where you've got these people that we call the Palestinians in Gaza along the coastline, when Israel began repopulating their land and people started moving in with migrations in the 1800s, what happened is that the Islam world, the Muslim world, said, we hate these Jews, we don't want them ever coming back here. And so they started moving in from like Egypt. So you had Arab peoples moving into those regions to try to, drive the Jews out. So some of the Palestinians would kind of be like an Arab background, and Philistines were not Arabs. But you probably had people, some people, and I don't know the answer to this. I guess somebody that knows the land of Israel's history really well could say yes or no, but I bet you probably had some people still living in those areas that traced all the way back to the time of maybe the Philistines. But I don't know. I would just say maybe. But the Canaanites did migrate into those areas like the Gaza Strip. It tells us that in the book of Judges, that when Joshua came in and drove them out of Hebron, that they went down into the coastline, and they began living in places like Gaza and Gath and Ekron and Ashdod. And so the Canaanites went in and merged in with the Philistines when the Jews came in and took over the entire land. So Canaanites were there. Then as you go a little further up the coastline, you have the ancient towns called Tyre and Sidon, which would be in modern day Lebanon. So in Lebanon, along the coastline, those were Canaanite cities. So those would have basically ancestors of ancient Canaanites.
And the Palestinians are Islamic, right?
Mostly. But about a fourth of them are Christian. A pretty good chunk of the Palestinians are Christian, kind of an Orthodox, an Orthodox Christianity. But the Orthodox Christianity that you have over there in that part of the world, like in Egypt, is not as bad Orthodox as what you get in like Russia or Greek Orthodox circles. There's actually kind of a little bit more of an evangelical character to it. I said 25%, I don't know, let's just see. What percentage of Palestinians are Christian? Oh, wow. Okay, I was way off on that, according to this. It says fewer than 1% of Palestinians are Christian. This is down from about 10% in 48. I don't know, I think it's more than that. Yeah. All right. So, okay, so, the genealogy thing, I'm going to send that send that over to you. And I don't know if this file is, if it's too big for me to send to you. It's 246 slides. I don't think this is email. But here's something to take note of. Notice here in Genesis chapter 11, here's the genealogy of Shem. These are the records of Shem. Shem was 100 when he became the father of Arphaxad, 2 years after the flood. And Arphaxad lived 35 years and became the father of Shelah. And then you go a little further. So you've got Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah, all right? Now, and it's got a time frame in terms of when these connect. But if you look in Luke chapter 3, the genealogy of Jesus in Luke 3, now Luke is working backwards the way that he did his genealogy. So here you've got Shem, and then you've got Arphaxad, but then there's one named Canaan, and then Shelah. See what I'm saying? So Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah. But in Luke, it says Shem, Arphaxad, Canaan, Shelah. Now, the whole flow of the chronology, the time frame doesn't change, but it just says that there's someone right here. Between here and here, you've got 35 years. Between Arphaxad and Shelah, you still have 35 years between here to here, but you find out that there's somebody else that was in between. And so probably what you had is that you had a kid named Shelah that was born, and then he was an early starter and had his own kid when he was about 15, 16, 17. And his grandfather, Arphaxad, ended up raising Shelah, and this in the biblical genealogy, it doesn't even include Canaan in that. Now, other genealogies that the Jews had, and they had in their records and in the temple, Luke had access to some of those other genealogies and look and include that with his genealogy of Christ, but it's not in the Genesis 11 genealogy. But it doesn't change the genealogy. You guys follow what I'm saying here? No, the attempt to argue for gaps is irrelevant because the time frames given in Genesis are measured by the number of years between one event and another event, regardless of how many generations occur between those, says James Johnson. All right. So the Bible's testimony is a young earth, 6,000 plus years. The genealogies are there and don't change. We talked a little bit about Big Bang. And there's, I mean, if you, like Jason Lau, when he was talking about this, and others, if you read stuff, Mike, you probably read a lot about this where, they'll say it's a bad theory, even unsaved, astronomers will admit that. One of the things that kind of they found out really in like the 20th century is that, okay, so if you went to, let's say, the Indianapolis 500 and you heard the cars coming, so that's called the Doppler effect, I guess, that when the sound is coming to you, it gives an increasing pitch, and then as it goes away, it has a lengthening pitch, The same thing is true with light. When light is coming toward you, it has blue shifts in its appearance. When light is traveling away from you, it has red shifts. So one of the things that happened, and Einstein really is kind of the one that picked up on this, anything I say on this stuff is like stretching the limit of anything I can even say about it. But I can repeat certain things that I've read from others. So, Einstein said, wow, I can't really make my theory of general relativity work. But he was basing it upon a static universe, that there's no expansion in the universe. Then when he was looking at like Hubble's telescopes, not the Hubble that we talk about now, but like going way back, around like 1920 or something like that, is that Einstein looked and he said, oh, wow, I see red shifts in the universe. This means that we're in an expanding universe. So he changed his model when it came to from a static universe to a dynamic universe that's expanding. And he said, oh, everything works now in my model. I don't know if Einstein is, his theories are true or not. I don't know anything. Huh?
I don't know.
Yeah. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that he's got something right, okay? What happened is that that's when they began to say, wait, we live in an expanding universe, which no big deal at all. Matter of fact, the Bible, uses quite a bit of language to talk about expansion within the universe. Yeah. So the idea of expansion of the universe is no problem at all, And it uses, I don't know, I didn't see where I had my comments on this. Somewhere in my notes I do. But it talks about, well, I'm the one who stretches out the heavens and the earth. Now, maybe there was a huge amount of expansion. So think about like the idea of the Big Bang, where it says, well, by nature, everything just kind of like did this, okay? Well, there could be something where God himself, when he brought it into existence, did that. There's...
Yeah, I agree. Created it with movement.
Yeah.
Expanding.
And so, as we talk about even things like, there's things that nobody knows how to answer, neither a creationist nor an evolutionist, like, how starlight, comes to us, because even with what we know about, even with what people assert about the age of the universe, we should never have the light that's coming from way out there reaching us.
Yeah, he created a mature earth.
I think that's probably, a consistently best kind of thing to add into all these equations.
You said mature?
Mature.
Yeah. So Adam, Adam was, a grown man at the moment when God made him. He didn't have to grow up. And when God made the lights, he placed not only the luminary, but also the light, and placed the light in existence.
Yeah,
So from day one, it's like, it's here.
Yeah, trees had rings.
Yeah. And that's, I think, consistently something that, as a creationist that we should hold to. And it eliminates the problem of saying, but how did that light get to us, And we don't know everything, and it's like we don't have to know everything.
And then God didn't have to change Adam's diapers.
I
He
told
got
you.
through that, didn't he?
Yeah. I wonder if he even thought about it. I don't think so.
Origin of the universe, logical and philosophical issues. Scientifically and philosophically, the notion of infinite regression is untenable. In other words, it's just always been there, eternal. Infinite regression is, I don't know. There's something called the, what's the
I know what you're talking about.
cause, something, the Kalam argument.
Yeah, okay.
But anyhow, the idea of infinite regression is kind of problematic in terms of physics. Entropy shows that matter must have had a beginning. At least, according to the laws of physics, it had to have a beginning. Eternal matter is tantamount to pantheism, saying everything is God if it's eternal. So everything had to come from somewhere. Order had to come from somewhere. Life did not come from non-life.
I guess that's a confusing thing if you go back. And I know you and I have talked about this before, and it just gets confusing. Maybe we don't spend a ton of time on it, but if matter never changes and saying eternal matter is tantamount to pantheism, how do we have an ever-expanding universe without it, unless matter is multiplying or it's being stretched out?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, you have the expansion of the universe, but that doesn't mean that matter is expanding.
Isn't the entire universe matter, though?
I don't know what's matter.
Yeah,
So I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know. Einstein called it ether, So yeah.
I think they say that only about 4% of the universe is actually matter. And the rest they call dark matter, meaning they don't know what it is.
Just space.
When you look at like historical anthropological information, virtually all cultures of the ancient world have some history that dates back to somewhere around the middle of the 3rd millennium BC. And that's, where you have the beginning of the flood and the dispersion of the nations, like 2500 BC.
So if it's millions and billions of years old, then does it take away the AD and the BC timing? Doesn't that screw it up
They
for
would
'em?
just say that we're measuring discernible time to human history. So
Just to a certain
right.
point.
So when they say 2,000, they're recognizing what we're 2,000 years from. They wouldn't say it, but
Oh, so they agree with that, but they think that there was way more time before
or when they
that.
use like 3,500, I guess they would say what's their BCE is what they say.
Yeah, before Common Era, yeah.
Yeah, they're still recognizing that it was only about 4,000 years ago that we even have records of humans or tools or things like that. So they're recognizing that, but then they're saying, oh, well, we just didn't have records, or we didn't have, they weren't advanced enough to keep records of themselves. But then
Well,
that
they were
brings
still
up,
monkeys or something.
yeah, but they still would have had to have tools and survival, places that they were living, all sorts of things.
Caveman.
Okay, so they believe that the earth is billions of years old, but Adam was created 6,000 years ago. Adam came out of the soup 6,000 years ago.
They
Well, I
even
think
think
they'd
Adam
say
is a
that, no,
thing?
I think they'd probably, I don't know, like secular anthropologists
Someone
place
came
the
out-
rise of humanoids about, like, I don't know, a couple 100,000 years ago or something.
Right, yeah, it's a couple 100,000 years ago.
Humanoid.
Okay, so they
Yeah,
really
that's
don't
right.
agree with the biblical
Concerning.
timeline, even
Oh, he's
when-
talking about people who just don't care about the Bible at all anyway. You're talking about Christians trying to coincide the two, right?
Mhm. Well, I don't know, when do they, okay, so evolutionists certainly believe in the pyramids and my Egyptian timeline that I'm looking at here.
Right.
So they agree with, and they agree that Israel was a nation, they actually agree with everything here.
Right. So if you
I
say,
guess everything after Genesis 12, is that what it is?
right, if you say we only have records of humans going back about 4,000 years roughly, they'd say, well, I believe things happened before that.
Yeah.
And you'd say, prove it. That's, they agree with our timelines, but they'll say that things happened before that we just don't have record of. And so we believe in that time, but we don't know anything about it. Yeah.
So if you look at, I don't know, yeah, now I'm not documenting these things, like the comments I'm making on some of these things, I document a lot of stuff, but some of these comments I'm not documenting, but I'm taking them from, sources that when you look at, let's say, dating back to the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, let's just say 2500, these days take you back to a flood kind of setting. It still leaves open the issue of pre-flood dates. I don't think, according to the Bible, anybody existed before the flood and survived except for Noah and his family. That's what the Bible says. If you say, well, yeah, the Egyptians were there way back 3000 BC, it's like, well, the Egyptians came out of Noah's grandson, Mizraim. So there's a problem with that, and I go with the Bible on that.
And the flood killed the dinosaurs? I don't remember if that's what you said.
Yeah, probably most of them.
Or the results of it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you had dinosaurs on the ark, so,
Yeah.
you could get, young dinosaurs that might be the size of, even, a dog, or something like that. And, reptiles will live, unless something happens, forever. They just keep growing. I suppose they might die because of the curse, but, reptiles keep growing. So if you had,
They don't have evolution?
well, if you had dinosaurs, say, T-Rexes that were living, 4,000 years ago, and, if you look at 4,000 years ago, the lifespan, before the flood, let's just say 5,000 years ago, you had human beings that were living into the 900s regularly. That was the rule.
Average age, yeah.
So, if you had long lifespans, and there's different explanations of why lifespans, began dropping after the flood. There's some explanations on why that might be. But if you had human beings living to be, 900 and plus years, if you had, a 900-year-old
Baby T-Rex.
Komodo dragon, that would be one nasty thing,
What we think of when we think of mythical dragons, it would be large.
Yeah, huge reptiles, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So, yeah, they're real huge reptiles.
Pastor, I have a question. So how does all of this fit in with like caveman stories and the artwork that we find in these caves that are many, many years old, and then the tools, the history of the tools, the iron and the bronze and the copper and all that? I mean, does that fit? I mean, is that fantasy? Where does that fit in? How does it fit in? Does it fit in?
Yeah. Yep, let's talk about that.
Here's
So-
a cartoon.
Suddenly, Bobby felt very alone in the world. Now, they talk about dinosaur extinction. Yeah, it's kind of like a popular topic. And there's really no big deal about it. Dinosaurs existed. Anybody that knows creation science knows, yeah, dinosaurs, they were real. God made them on the sixth day. First thing he did is he made land animals, and dinosaurs are land animals, and then he made man last. So we believe that dinosaurs existed. It's just they existed at the same time of human beings. But, one theory of the dinosaur extinction is that there was a giant meteor that hit the earth, 65 million years ago, and so caused all the dinosaurs to be extinct, but not all the other creatures. All right. It's just
Dumb.
another theory. After fish became land animals, they eventually turned into birds. So dinosaurs turned into birds. That's really terrible biology. It's almost irrational to even try to answer that. Here's a theory. Men hunted them down and killed them. Can you imagine the barbecue they had when they killed the last T-Rex? come on over, you can bring the
Come
beer,
come
I'll
one,
bring the
come
meat,
all.
you know?
Bring your tools.
Yeah.
Bring your tools.
Uh,
Beer and coffee.
Every day there are hundreds, I mean, every year, there's hundreds or thousands of species that go extinct every year in the modern world. And when you look at the reproduction and growth rate of large animals, it's usually slow. So if you have extinction happening because of bad environment things, or they're being hunted down, then that's easy to say.
They were animals of little brain.
Here's a big deal. They simply went extinct in a post-flood world. But, yeah. The real reason.
Smoking.
What does it say?
The real reason why dinosaurs went extinct.
They're smoking cigarettes.
Oh,
Smoking in the boys' room. Missing links are still missing because there is no such thing as a missing link. It used to be a big deal, like, Ann, when we were young, right? Right, Mike? It's like talk in the 60s about like the missing link. Nobody ever talks about that anymore. But that was like a big deal,
now we see transitional fossils.
Here's a couple things about general science, that would say that, no, we don't have an old Earth like millions, it's only thousands. Ocean sedimentation, when you look at the amount of sediment that is going into the ocean every year, whatever the number comes up to, it would say that this Earth is not more than a few thousand years old. If you had an Earth that was 4 billion years old, the oceans would be filled up with, we wouldn't have oceans. The same thing with the salination rates, where sodium contents in the ocean, you wouldn't be able to, no life would be in the ocean with the amount of salt that is going in every year.
Where's the salt coming from?
Coming from all the minerals on the Earth,
Oh, okay.
then it goes into the ocean. But if you had this going on for millions of years, there would be no life. It'd be like the Dead Sea.
Okay.
Earth's magnetic field is known to be in a state of decay, and we wouldn't have life if if you had this, if you reversed it and you look back. How strong was the magnetic field? 50 billion years ago, or 50 million years ago, nothing would be alive. The helium content in the atmosphere, we've got, helium disperses into outer space, but there's a huge amount of helium content in our atmosphere that says we can't be very old. And then known historical records are a key thing right there. And then, of course, these laws of thermodynamics like creation and conservation. The fossil record, this is another thing. Anybody that knows, I don't know, you can correct me on this, but Mike, he's done a lot of studies on this. Anybody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to the fossil record would not try to argue that for a Darwinian evolution based upon the fossil record.
They try to say that the fossil record supports evolution, but others, like Richard Dawkins, think that there's so little evidence from the fossil record that they say we don't need fossils anymore. We can prove evolution from genetics
From genetics?
and DNA studies.
Yeah, but I don't know, from, quite a few things that I've read, creationists, and even quotes from non-creationists, like, there's not a case to be made for evolution based upon fossil records. There's not a case to be made. And, we don't have time, this is an entire course, so we don't have time to, go through, some of these things. Take the course.
We just did that, last semester or 2 semesters ago?
Yeah. Now, what we do see is that as a model for geology, catastrophism really is a better model for explaining what we do see in geology than uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism is the idea that says that everything's basically remained the same, and so the present is the key to explaining the past. So whatever's happening right now, that's how I explain the entire history of the Earth. Catastrophism says, no, we think that there was giant catastrophes that struck the Earth, in particular, a huge flood. And that gives a better explanation for why things are the way they are. So for example, if we were to look at the Grand Canyon that is this big, then we see a river going down the middle of it. Uniformitarianism says, well, a little bit of water over a long period of time created this big canyon. The flood model says, no, there was a massive amount of water that came through in a short amount of time that carved out the canyon during the flood, because the flood waters were crashing off of the continent. And what it did is it left a giant canyon, and so a river that comes down from the Rocky Mountains flows down the middle because a lot of water created the canyon in a little bit of time. It really is a much better explanation. And there's all kinds of other problems with trying to say that the Colorado River created the Grand Canyon. But you have two radically different explanations for explaining the same data. All the data is the same. How are we going to explain it? Mount St. Helens was significant. We had Bill talked about that when he was here. Bill Hosch. Yeah, I've got a movie on this. Because you saw things happen in a matter of hours that evolutionists would have said, oh, that had to take a million years, and some of these things happen in a matter of hours or days. The kinds of geological events. I mean, look at this Grand Canyon, 18 miles wide, and the river is like 1,000 feet wide. I may not be a smart man, Jenny. Can a slow process of mutation really explain how non-life became life and how such complexity arose by chance? No. Can a slow, steady process explain billions of dead things that were suddenly buried in mud and rock and water to become fossils? No. Fossils happen when they're buried rapidly in mud. Fossils don't happen, when something lays on the ground. Or even in the water, I mean, you got a dead fish, it's going to be eaten up in a matter of probably a couple days.
We'd have a lot more fossils if everything that died was fossilized,
Much data is at odds with uniformitarianism, but not catastrophism. And so one here, you've got, notice this fish. He's got another fish in its mouth. It's a fossil. He was in the middle of eating a fish when it got buried. See that? That's another fish. Global flood stories are found in many different civilizations. I don't know, there's like about 120 of them or something.
I don't know.
The flood with its cataclysmic impact can account for the radical geological evidence, including marine fossils on all the highest mountains of the earth. The top of Mount Everest is marine limestone. And I remember John Morris, when he was here in town, it was in 2007, he said, what you find when you go on top of Everest or any other big mountain? Clams. Everywhere. Highest mountains of the world, clams. Why? Because those mountains weren't there. They used to be way down here. They were covered in water, and then at the end stages of the flood is when you had all the shifting of the Earth's plates creating these mountains, and then the waters come crashing down off the continents. The flood can account for large amounts of cosmic radiation. Whitcomb and Morris, the flood can explain huge sedimentary layers and fossils across the face of the planet. The flood can account for fossilized things like jellyfish and all kinds of rapidly buried animals with things like undigested food in their stomachs. The flood can account for massive quantities of fossils in high altitudes like the Rockies, Himalayas. The flood can account for the huge rise of mountain ranges across the planet. All the continents had mountain ranges that came up, But when the mountain ranges came up on the continents, you also had canyons forming in the ocean, in the oceans. So the floodwaters went into huge canyons. I mean, how high is Everest? 29,000 feet. How deep is the Mariana Trench off the coast of Japan? About 36,000 plus feet. It's deeper than Everest is high, you know. So you had these canyons forming, and that's where all the waters went. And then the continents shifted and made the mountain ranges. So every continent has, you know, huge mountain ranges. Rocky Mountains, Himalayas, the Andes. The flood can account for identical geological formations spread across continents. So if we looked at something like, let's say, the east coast of America, and you compare it to what you see in places like, Europe, West Africa, the same geological mountain ranges and formations are here on the east coast, I don't know, whatever it is, as you find over there on the west edge of Europe and Africa. It's because they used to be together. It's called Pangea, the idea that there used to be one massive earth, massive, Pan means all and Gea means earth, Pangea. So yeah, you know, these things shifted apart. And going down in the middle between America and Europe, you've got a volcanic tear in the bottom. It's called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. This thing is continually, you know, kind of growing, this volcanic tear in the middle of the Atlantic. And so the continents are still separating, but that separation that took place when the continents separated was probably happening at, you know, a rate of, you know, whatever it would have been, you know, hundreds or thousands of feet a day, you know, where it was ripping apart for a time period. Right now it's only like, I don't know, whatever, inches a year or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but it's
Huh?
very slow now.
Yeah. So, you know, if they say, well, yeah, it's separating, but, you know, that could never have happened. Well, it could have happened really, really quickly. Early flood deposits are thickest in the East Coast. So if you come over here to the East Coast, the flood deposits are up to 2 miles deep. But because of what probably was higher elevations on the West Coast, from like basically from here onward, Colorado onward, you know, the deposits in the West are sometimes only several hundred yards deep. But you know, you've got like 10,000 feet worth of flood layers way over here. But you know, we can walk up to places right here, walk right up and see where the flood deposits start. The great unconformity up here at Glen Eyrie or Manitou. I mean, I love walking up to that spot and just looking at it, you know. Late flood activity included the breakup of the Pangea and violent tsunamis across the west, with virtually no late sedimentation in the east. Dinosaurs in the west fled northward, called the Dinosaur Highway. They tried to get away as the floodwaters were rising on the continent, and they tried to flee up into the highest elevations of North America at that time. So where do you have the most dinosaurs? In Wyoming, Montana, Colorado. Yeah, and then eventually the waters caught up to them, and they died.
The most dinosaurs in the world or just in the United States?
There's dinosaurs all over the world. Yeah, this is the biggest concentration in America is kind of like in this area right here. Greatest fossil deposits in Wyoming, Montana, and Alberta. Flood can explain massive ocean canyons. So again, you know, you talk about like the Mariana Trench. Psalm 104 talks about God creating the canyons for the waters. The catastrophism of the global flood would dwarf all other catastrophism. The flood can explain massive vegetation sheets from all of the trees and vegetation that settled and got compressed and became the coal shelves. So that's where the coal comes from. It's not dead dinosaurs, it's a bunch of vegetation mats on Noah's floodwaters. the flood can explain massive glaciers and an ice age. There was an ice age. And probably what happened is that after the flood, one of the things that happened in the flood is that you had a massive warming of all the oceans. And one of the reasons why would be because of all the volcanic activity that was happening. But secondly, you also have, we have a fair amount of pretty objective evidence that there was a tremendous amount of nuclear decay that took place at the time of the flood. And this might have even been some of the things that caused the flood, is that you had some huge amounts of solar activity, like coronal mass ejections, and so the neutrinos that came from outer space went to work in the half-life of all of the atoms, and that you might have, we don't know, but you might have had a massive amount of nuclear decay that took place in the granite way down under the earth, and the breakup of those lower amounts of the earth is what caused the superheating of the underwater oceans and the underwater lakes. And so you had the explosions coming up from underneath the surface at the time of Noah's flood, because of the fact that there was breakup of the earth at the lower levels. You guys follow what I'm saying on this? And solar activity influences the decay rate of nuclear atoms. So a huge concentration of increase in neutrinos coming from the sun would cause a breakup, and that breakup very well might be what caused the explosions of water coming from underneath the lower surface of the earth. You had rain coming down from above, and then the floodwaters that came up from below. And as they look at all of the flood records, all the records in the geology, there is a considerable reason to say that where they see the flood deposits happening, and they tie it to the Noahic flood, is they can tell that there was a huge amount of nuclear decay that took place in a very short period of time. Granite contains uranium. Uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.4 billion years. It's a very slow half-life. And yet they can see evidence that there was a really advanced state of decay that took place in those deposits that would tie to the flood. But the evidence is that it didn't take place, all this decay, nuclear decay, didn't take place over billions of years, but it happened very quickly. And they can tell it because the fact that, one reason why is because they can see there's 8 stages of decay in uranium-238. They can see huge amounts of decay, but anyhow.
Well, evidently a lot of it ended up in Ukraine. I mean, I'm thinking that's what President Trump thinks.
Oh, uranium?
Well, I'm just thinking the minerals and.
Yeah. Okay, so here's just something that there is, significant geological evidence that would say that it looks like there was a massive amount of nuclear decay that took place in a short period of time, and that may be tied to what started the flood, at least from the subterranean side. Okay, so if you had that happening, if there was a huge amount of decay, there's going to be huge amounts of heat produced from that nuclear decay. So you've got a massive heating of the oceans that took place, possibly from the high nuclear decay, and B, from all of the volcanic activity of the Earth's shifting that took place in the flood. And so you have ocean waters that are really warm. Those ocean waters produce huge amounts of moisture and clouds. The clouds come over the continents, over the poles, and then when it gets to the places where it's extremely cold, you all of a sudden now have something called a glacier. Those glaciers were part of an ice age that came after the flood. And for the last, let's just say if the flood was 2500 BC, for the last 4,500 years, you've had a general warming of the earth that has happened ever since that ice age happened, and you had all of those water deposits taken to the poles, and now, we're seeing ice disappearing in the poles. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, maybe the Earth is losing all that ice.
So
But it's
the
not
ice age
because
wasn't worldwide.
the ice age.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think the kind of came from like the poles,
Because
North Pole,
how
South Pole.
would Noah's family have existed in different parts of the world with the ice age?
I guess not any problem. I mean, they came off the ark. They began settling at Babel, and then and then God eventually scattered them, and so you had Asiatic Hamites that came across like in the Bering Strait and migrated up into Alaska and Canada, and then eventually they kept coming down into what is America, Central America, Mexico, South America. Those were Semitic, not Semitic, but Hamite migrations that came across probably land bridges, ice bridges.
Has there been a posited, from people who study this and are creationists, is there a posited duration of the ice age? Like about how long they thought maybe it lasted or when it happened?
Well, the creationist model says yeah, we believe in an ice age,
Right.
and it came around the time after the flood, because of the flood. And then, so, over the last 4,400 years, 4,300 years, you've had, what created it was the superheated oceans because of the flood and the things that happened at the flood. And so that's what creates all the moisture that brings it over the poles. And then we've just been seeing 4,300 years of it.
Okay, so you're not making it like when you're growing up learning about ice ages, they'll make it like a punctiliar time frame where you're kind of saying, no, it was this, and then it kind of just melted off, and we've seen a progressive melting away.
Yeah.
So it's not,
And that's kind of like standard
not
creationist
even like
answer.
an ice age, it's just kind of a,
Well, massive amount of ice, and it's been melting ever since.
yeah.
You see different kinds of things like woolly mammoths and dinosaurs and saber-toothed tigers. They find sometimes these animals, like in Siberia a few years ago, they found one where this thing was buried in like ice and mud, and it still had undigested food in it. I think a woolly mammoth. How did that thing get buried? This giant animal. Well, it got caught in a flood. So yeah, there's a lot that can be explained. A reasonable explanation is that yeah, this is all evidence for the flood. Today there's about 7,000 languages. But no more than roughly 94 different language families. All of those arose at Babel. So this is here, probably about, so Usher said that tied Babel about 2357. That's kind of what I come up with. Now after the flood, we see lifespans, in the Bible decreasing. So if you go look at, like Noah's generation, 900 and some years, then, over about 10 generations, it comes down to like, less than 100, Why is it? Well, probably the best answer is that there was some kind of bottlenecking of the human genome that happened with only Noah and his people, 8 people on the ark, and so there was a loss of longevity genes that, you had some of these longevity genes that, were lost at the time of the flood. And, I don't know, I've asked this question of different people, could it be that there was such an impact from either earthly radiation or from cosmic radiation because of, the flood and the things that happened where radiation has hit all life and caused a loss of the longevity? Seems like people aren't really in favor of that viewpoint, but
So essentially just saying that the pre-flood world was just better, more habitable for human beings.
Maybe it was the environment, maybe it was more habitable, but I don't know. You know, I wouldn't, I mean, because I've heard people say, I don't think so. But I think there really could be something to the idea that maybe something in all the radiation that came upon the earth at the time of the flood had an effect upon somehow lifespan, but I don't know. Got other questions here. We're probably coming up on we've only got about an hour left, you know, but other questions from your reading that, you know, we could hit on.
Oh, bless you.
Thanks.
I've got lifespans here, but I do want to get to something here. I have a little bit that I want to go over. This is, Darwin said, never mind, fossil evidence, no good. Doesn't support, I mean, so give me any thoughts or questions?
Well, just one observation from my reading. Ken Ham of Answers
Yeah.
in Genesis makes the point that old earth creationists do defend the resurrection, which is not supported by secular science.
Yeah.
But then, so they're not consistent. You know, they go along with secular science when it comes to the age of the earth and evolution, but they depart from secular science
Yeah.
when it comes to
Yeah, they're bad on every
the
side.
resurrection. But it would be nice if they were consistent with both.
Right, on one hand, they want to prioritize external authority, and on the other hand, they want to...
On one hand, it's the authority of secular science.
Right.
On the other hand, it's the authority of the scriptures.
internal, external, and external, yeah. One.
Yeah, now, you gotta give me a few more minutes. Thank you. Mary Schweitzer, yeah? I love making fun of Germans. I like Germans. I'm not against them. Are you, you're Klar? Of course, Klar. I'm teasing. All right, so Mary Schweitzer, so let's just go to Wikipedia. I saw something the other day that said the guy that started Wikipedia and owns it recently became a Christian.
Cool.
I don't
Really?
know if that's true, yeah.
That could change some of the articles.
All right. So Mary Schweitzer, paleontologist, studied at North Carolina, University of North Carolina. Where are we here?
She professes to be a Christian.
She's Catholic background, I think, right?
I don't know.
Yeah. So here's what happened. She was, you know, and she's not the only one, but this kind of became a popular one, is that in 2010, you know, she published these things. She was doing research on a T-Rex bone up in the Hell Creek Formation in Montana, and poured some acid on the outside of the bone to kind of do some research, and the whole bone broke open. She goes, I broke open the bone. But on the inside of the bone, guess what they found? Soft tissue, blood cells, pliable, soft tissue. Now, that shouldn't be, because everything decays, and there should be no reason at all if something's 65 million years old, there would be anything. It would all be completely rotted away, biological decay. And so, you know, this was a really, really big deal. When she found it, she said, ooh, cool beans. But they also have, you know, there's been about 50 to 60 different cases, documented cases of soft tissues in dinosaur fossils. Mark Armitage is a paleontologist, formerly of Cal State Northridge, a couple miles up the street from Grace Community Church. He wrote an article in a science journal saying, look how many examples of soft tissue finds in dinosaur fossils. And Cal State Northridge fired him. They said, we don't want you bringing your religion into our science department. He said, I didn't say a thing about religion or the Bible. He sued them, and he won a big chunk of money. But, like, we don't like this idea that you're finding soft tissue in dinosaurs, but there's been, multitudes of, documented cases of it. It tells us that these dinosaurs are only a few thousand years old, not 65 million. Furthermore, they have done carbon-14 dating on these dinosaur, because you can only do C14 dating on something that is organic and is not fossilized. You can't do C14 dating on a bone that is fossilized because it's turned into stone. But they've done C14 dating on a bunch of these, and guess what? The C14 dates are producing something under 20,000 years. This is really, really bad news for, the evolutionary world. This is super heavy duty, like, look, this is what it is. And they'll try to slip away from it, but you can't. You can't slip away from it. Now I've got some of these listed right here, different examples of it and when, these things were dated. But this is really big stuff. Yeah, dinosaurs are real. They lived and died about, 4,000 years ago. It's called a flood. And that's when most of them would have been killed, in the flood. Here's a fossil analysis with verified original soft tissue. There's 42 cases right there. Yeah. Big stuff. That's really, really big time. Anything else? I think that's probably real, the Paluxy River Basin.
I'm favorable to it.
Yeah.
I think so.
Where they've got human footprints and dinosaur footprints in the same, fossilized stone or the same limestone or whatever. They'll try to argue against it, But the same thing is down here. Have you ever been to Tuba City, Arizona?
Yes, I have seen those.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, I've got some pictures that, somebody took, they were down there, and it's like, same thing, dinosaur footprints and human footprints. How about this one here? This is, right here. That's Puff the Magic Dragon.
Yeah, that's what Ian was talking about.
Yeah. This is in Wupatki National Park, and so it's a petroglyph drawing, sketch on the canyon walls just down here in Arizona of a fire-breathing dragon. Guess what? They did exist. Dragons. Here's this one here was an Egyptian mosaic, and it's called Crocodilosaurus. So they've got a dinosaur. They're fighting against a dinosaur. This one right here comes from where is it here? Plates from Hierakonpolis, so that's, I guess, is that Greece? But you can see dinosaurs right here, long-necked dinosaurs. This one is a temple, a Hindu temple in Cambodia that dates to about 1100, and they've got stegosauruses. But you look at what other animals they have. There's baboons, there's gazelles, there's all these different animals that they've carved, but one of the animals that they've got carved is a stegosaurus. You know why? Because they existed, and they just had carvings of animals that they observed. This is in England. Here's St. George, who was rumored to have killed a dragon in the 3rd century. You've got dragons on the Babylonian Ishtar Gate because they were real. Herodotus, a Greek historian, 5th century BC, talked about winged serpents. Marco Polo went to China in the 13th century AD and said that the emperor had dragons that would carry his chariot, and tow his chariot, and he had a special guy designated to be the dragon caretaker. So, there's a lot of historical...
You have to have a special guy for that if they're carrying your chariot. You gotta train them to do that.
How to Train a Dragon.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
Just a little boy.
Yeah, so, dinosaurs? Yeah. Now, it's funny. These guys will make fun of Christians when they say, yeah, we believe in dragons. It's absurd.
Your wings and a fire breath away.
Yeah. But, I mean, we can even look at something like, what a bombardier beetle is, right? It can shoot two chemicals out of its butt, and when the chemicals come together, it burns. Well, it's because it's got something built into it that is a fire-breathing out of its butt beetle. But, the ability to have something that creates, combustion is not a big deal, scientifically, biologically. Okay, so you asked a question about this one. What about some of these hoaxes, okay? There's hoaxes, not true, false things. Now look at that, the Uruguay right there. Yeah, that's Lord of the Rings. Here's Piltdown Man, 1912, exposed in the 50s. It combined the skull of a man and the jaw of an ape. Stephen Gould from Harvard said, this is a bad hoax. But it was one that people went with. Java Man, they said, no, these were took bones from 2 different places a mile away. Peking Man, they said, oh, look at this. Here's a humanoid. But no, you know what it was? They were monkeys that didn't have the back of their head because people were smashing the head and eating chilled monkey brains. My favorite dessert. As Indiana Jones.
So then how did Adam and Noah's people turn into monkey-eating brain people?
Twisted people, man.
This is sin.
Nebraska
Okay,
Man
sin.
was a hoax where they took a single tooth and they constructed a whole man out of it. And then they later on found out that the tooth was from a pig. There's Lucy. I want to be like you. All right. That's all. Unless you want me to talk about radioisotope dating.
Mm-mm.
Oh man, it's good stuff.
I know.
He could go on.
C14. Yeah. And more on dinosaur. Yeah.
But all of this information that you're flashing there is ignored by old Earth Christians. They won't touch it.
Ignored by who?
But old Earth Christians.
Yeah, I don't come across many of those. I know they're out there, but
Yeah.
probably more than probably a lot of them, huh?
But what I'm saying is you've got the evidence, but they intentionally ignore it.
I was checking after I made that statement about Catholics to Betsy. I went and checked a little bit more. It gave a number of about 30 to 40% would hold to a day-age theory of some sort, but then it said close to 68%, or it said 68, close to 70% accept evolution to some degree.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
And I think that just has to do with a misunderstanding of the nature of general revelation.
They don't know necessarily what's in the Bible, and they're listening to what they learn at school.
Well, they want to validate general revelation, but they're skipping the part that it still needs to be interpreted. General revelation doesn't interpret itself.
Well, how can you tell a scientist they're wrong? Oh my God.
Like this. You're wrong.
But when you're young,
That's like if we said, we couldn't, the science of 1,000 years ago is largely malarkey nowadays. There's stuff that we took. But, if you would have told those guys that they were wrong back then, they would have said, well, who are you? We're the scholars of the day. 1,000 years later, we're saying, well, even just 250 years ago, we were bloodletting still.
you know,
So talk to me about how science is so...
Yeah, science. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. All right. Well, Lord, thank you for giving us this chance to spend at least a few minutes to think about the glory of your creation and why we should believe in your Son Jesus and believe your word. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay.